Hey everyone, this is Tom, and this week's character is Zolo Driftiron for Henry. Um, I was actually really excited to get another dwarf so soon. Last time I did a dwarf, it was because I had to implement Dwarf Week, which is still going to happen again. I love drawing dwarves. Dwarves are my favorite. But dwarves are actually played very rarely by people. I'm not sure what the demographics are like in the latest edition of Dungeons and Dragons, but I know in other places it's about 4% of players will pick a dwarf. And since they're my favorite, I want to draw more of them, so that's what Dwarf Week was about. There's going to be some different weeks for different races moving forward. But yeah, I was really happy to have another dwarf so soon, even at all. And especially, surprisingly, this one had a nautical theme again as well. The nautical theme didn't come out very much at all in the last dwarf we did, but this one's a bit more. But it was just sort of interesting to have that thing in common. I never would have suspected it, even in the first place. Like a dwarf with a nautical theme, it makes no sense. But or at least it's never come up in my brain. So to have it come up twice is kind of a surprise, but a nice one. I think it works. Actually, Henry pointed it out. He described it quite well in his description. Like during his introduction, he went on about, I'll go through some of this as we go, but how it always seems kind of baffling that dwarves aren't treated as a nautical race. They seem sort of quite well built for it, with the low center of gravity and just like hardy folks and stable and even going as much as like their height makes it a bit more cozy down below deck. His description, his reasoning for it was a lot more thorough than mine, but they seem quite naturally fitting for a ship-based life on the sea. But it's fun to play around with the motif and the designs and things, because people have a built-in, pretty built-in idea of what a dwarf should look like, even culturally, and then to have that manifested in different ways, especially in like something as like a nautical theme is they both come with their own accent, and to mix the accents and the vocabulary of those things is very stimulating. I didn't push things too dwarvy. He is a piratey type, but we'll go into. So he's got sort of a cobbled together outfit, but we'll get into his outfit more as we get there. One thing I think some people might notice who have watched these videos is I spent a lot more time than I usually do on the under anatomy, or the inside anatomy, the structural anatomy portion of this character, just like the skeleton and the bones. I've still been in the last video I mentioned how much of a rut I was stuck in, and I think I was able to diagnose that it was the problem that I always fall into whenever I found myself in a rut, is that I think about how I draw something rather than what to draw. It's sort of hard to explain, where it's like I'll draw a head shape, but I'll be drawing it the way that I think that I should, because that's how I always draw heads, and it just gets me all freaked out and wonky. But either way, it's hard to explain the problem, but the solution at this point was just to take my time to get into it, look at things fresh, put in the extra little bit of time, even going so far as doing the ribs. I did the ribs on this one, which I hate. Well, it was my least favorite part of all the anatomy stuff, was always just getting the ribs right, because for something so simple, there's a lot of nuance to how ribs form around the body. And even with these ones, I did take a few liberties and shortcuts, but it was, even though it took a lot longer than what I normally do, I feel like it broke me out of something. I've been eager to draw in my sketchbook more. I've been doing doodles more and stuff on the bus, and it's just been good. So this actually paid off. I felt like I was getting a bit rusty and stifled, and just slowing down, using it as a chance to study and just to remember that one of the reasons I'm doing this is to get better. And like let's get better, and that's with studies and practice, and that's what I wanted to use this as my drawing time. And get some more out of it for myself. I get lots out of it. It's just really stimulating and fun, but I was really, really happy to just put the extra time in. It's really, I mean, I've said it a lot of times in different videos, but with anatomy, it's you can forget stuff. Like stuff gets pushed in the more you learn somewhere else, and you can get really complacent and relaxed with anatomy, or like I can. Let's just blame me. Um, but I can get too stale with things, and it's nice to just go in and just do things the long way. Even like foot bones and stuff, I put a lot more time into the feet than I normally do. Um, but I'd like to do this more often. Timing permitting. So yeah, similar things with the first dwarf I did. Very Neanderthal inspired as far as like how the barrelishness of the rib cage and the stoutness of the limbs. Uh, Dwarves, I'd always picture them, of course, being stocky. Pretty much no matter what um, intellectual property you're working with, everybody understands that dwarves are the stocky ones. Uh, so, but in this case, rather than just having like a child's body, I wanted to start off with this at the skeletal level, where if even though even the bones themselves being thick, it'll influence the anatomy on top as you start adding on the layers. And so if you had things that were more human child proportioned or like short bodied, then they'd just look a bit too wafy and thin and spry. And you really want them to to have a lot of that heft and that breadth. And one thing I've never liked is just the World of Warcraft dwarves as an example of like where their hands are basically touching the ground, and it's just something went kind of overboard there. I mean, what can you do with such an exaggerated style? But I think just as long as they look hefty and sturdy and stocky, you're pretty much good. They don't have to be monsters. I mean, you should do whatever you feel is appropriate, but I think as long as they just have like the right structure and the skeleton that you're basing it on, I think that power and that heft will come through. Similar thing done with the muscles too. Just putting in extra timing and patience just to get in there and look at stuff. And actually, one thing, I was visiting a friend's house last Friday, and he has this amazing book collection. And I just saw one that stuck out, and I picked it up. It was Yoga Anatomy. And he said I could borrow it, but when I left, I forgot all about it. And so on Monday, I remembered it. And then rather than ask him to bring it, I just ordered my own copy on Amazon. And it came the next day, which was really nice. But it's an absolutely fantastic book for seeing how muscles kind of overlap and how thick they are, and even like especially like what they look at when they're foreshortened in different directions and different poses and stretches. And I'm really excited to start incorporating some of that knowledge into my studies and my poses and things, and just I'm just constantly trying to increase my ability to depict the human body or a humanoid body in any pose and just get all the muscles right. To me, that's just super important. Muscles and drapery and just anything, just keeping it on model. Like that's some of the most important, if not the most important parts of concept art right there. Outside of the abstract, like your ideas and stuff, but just anatomy, fabrics, soft materials, and hard materials. That's pretty much the main bulk of it. But yeah, so yeah, Yoga Anatomy. I think it's on like second edition or something. You'll find it on Amazon, no problem. I find that one thing I'm worried about, especially the more anatomy that I draw and the more I look back on it and the more mistakes I see and improvements, which is a good thing. You should be hoping that your old art looks bad to you. But there's only so much that you can get Sorry, I just got an email. It's just distracting me. Don't worry, I'm not reading it. There's a little pop-up thing that just totally threw me off course. Um, yeah, but from diagrams, there's a lot that you miss as far as like the thickness and the layering and the twists and like where is it thick and thin. You know, you can get the general shapes right, but when they really move around, when they're stacked, like really how, what are the angles really? And something like Strength Training Anatomy is another one of my favorite anatomy books. But the poses are very, I mean, they're often at like varying angles and things, which is good. But they're also very sort of standard poses, and they have so much value. They're incredible drawings, incredibly useful. But there's just not so much as far as straining, like stretching your body out or foreshortening, and yeah, just getting a sense of that is just absolutely just crucial. Getting a like a posability where like you got to be able to think in 3D and grab stuff and pose it in 3D, like think of an object and depict it and then rotate it, and it won't be a problem, because this is one thing I've always tried to impart on people when I was a teacher was as when you're an illustrator or concept artist, you're not drawing you're not drawing 2D, like you're drawing real 3D things. He has a broken nose, a slightly broken nose, by the way. That's what all these notes and nose details are for. But yeah, you're not drawing something that's 2D. You're drawing something that's 3D in 2D. Like you're transmitting that object onto a 2D plane so that people can see what it is. So your brain is already thinking of it in 3D. Like if you're a concept artist or if you're an illustrator, try sculpting. Go get a brick of Sculpey, or not even anything that expensive. Like get some Play-Doh and make a skull or a head and just see what you do. Like you'll get it. It'll click right away. The first thing might not be so good, but if you just do that for a couple afternoons, I think you'll be surprised with how far along you are naturally. Just because your brain is already thinking in 3D. We live in 3D. Our brain is obsessed with 3D, and our drawings are of 3D things. Even if you're getting it wrong, you're still thinking in 3D. Like when a child draws like a face and the eyes are huge, that's a result of us living in 3D, and that's a result of like them trying to proportion things and put stuff how they go in their property, or like just like children's drawings of houses and things. Like the houses are often like up from the person, because as something goes towards the horizon, that's what it does. The house is up from you. It's all just in there. So that's what I think. So with the human body, basically, it's like you need the structure, but then you also need the malleability, which is what I'm excited about getting from this yoga anatomy book. Is more of that, where it's just like, okay, the leg looks like this if you're standing up holding a sword, but if you're jumping with one leg back, how do all those muscles really squish and stretch? Because there is like a lot that you can figure out by just doing point-to-point things, where you've got the bones, where those go, and then you just connect the muscles to where the muscles go with straight lines, and then just sort of intuben them, like make them tube shape with like a slight football sort of tapered ends, and then it'll just be there for you. But there's definitely nuance and subtlety to it, and even if there's not much there, or like there's only so much more refinement you can do, I think it's definitely one of those cases of like aiming for the moon and you'll land in the stars sort of thing. Like sort of aim high, and whatever it actually does stick will still have an effect, even if it doesn't work so much. But yeah, so putting on the skin now, it was just really awesome and just relaxing and rewarding and it saved me from my rut. It got me out of the rut. It's just even just like all the bones in the fingers they're just make them little cylinders, and then make them bones and wrap them around and put the handle there and put the fingers around, and just nice, just good practice. That's what was really happy for this one. For me, anyway. So with this armor, he's got a breastplate, sort of an upper body and shoulder, sort of a short sleeve scale armor from the belly scales of a blue dragon. So that's what this is. The design changes quite a bit. But yeah, this is like sort of what I was mentioning about Zolo's costume earlier, is that he's a pirate, essentially. I'll go into his description as we go. I'll read out some of the stuff about him too. But he is generally a pirate, so a lot of that will involve plunder, and just higgledy-piggledy, whatever works, whatever's best is the stuff that you're going to use. Just like with Terrell, one of the earlier characters, is the same kind of thing. If you're going to be a looting character, your outfit's going to be pretty discordant. There's going to be different eras of cultures and different time frames and materials and styles and different like the work of different races and species all mixed together, and because you're just sort of doing whatever works. Like you find something and here you go. Now for this one, the description did include fantastic eyebrows. And so these were the first ones that I tried. I did sort of simplify them. To me, it was reading too much of like Hook from Hook, Captain Hook, the Dustin Hoffman version with Robin Williams. It just kind of, he's got the eyebrows a bit like that, and I wanted to not call too much a deliberate comparison to like pirate cliches. Plus, they seemed a bit too flourishy. I think the way that I read Zolo was that he was quite a bit more brash and down to earth. He wasn't flamboyant. He has personality, but he's not flashy or anything. So he has this iron rod that he found, a completely nondescript rod. I think in hindsight, I should have probably added some slight design to it rather than just. It kind of reminds me of the inanimate carbon rod from The Simpsons way back long ago. It's just literally a bit, it was described as being nondescript, so I took him at his word. So I'm sorry, Henry, if you're disappointed with the nondescript rod. Was described as just being tied into his beard now as a beard weight, something that Henry thought would be, and I agree with him very much, as a beard weight to keep the beard from blowing in your face while you're on deck or in a fight, and that is obviously that's definitely something that beards would be mindful of. So I thought that was great. He mentioned having some sort of just loose knot involved that was sort of holding it on. At first I thought of some kind of like a reef knot or granny knot. There's actually even like a type of, it looks sort of like a, you can just look it up, granny knot or reef knot. Granny knot is the badly done one. But this looks sort of like a pretzel. It's very common on board naval. It's for like holding bags closed pretty easily. But there's something called a thief knot, which looks a lot like one of those, but you tie it up slightly wrong, so that the thought is that when somebody comes and takes something from your bag, they'll tie it back up, not noticing that it was actually a thief knot and not a reef knot. And so they'll tie it back as a reef knot, and you'll know that if you come back and it's tied differently, then somebody stole from you. Now I actually didn't use any of those knots, but I then remembered something that I thought would be a bit more interesting, is something called an icicle hitch. And an icicle hitch is sort of like a constrictor knot that, in theory, I haven't tried it out, but it's where it gets its name from, is that if you can hold stuff, you can hang stuff from an icicle or like an upside down cone, because of how the rope the more weight you pull down on it, the tighter the grip goes, and the way that the binding is lined up, it'll hold it on to even a cone hanging from a ceiling. And I could see how it works in the diagrams. It makes sense, but I would just love to try it out and see if it could actually work. But I thought that would be a good, interesting thing. And also, it's something that can't be yoinked out, because even if he spins his head really quick, with something just like a typical knot, it could just slide out through the hoop of rope that you have tied in there. And then so if he turns his head or somebody tries to grab it, it's just going to get held in, and something that no one can can really pull out. I thought that would be sort of fitting. So it's got the same look, but it's got a bit more function. So once again, I'm still definitely loving this frame idea. It's tedious. It's a real pain in the butt sometimes, but it helps out a lot. I think it saves the time. It saves more than the time that I put in. For anybody who hasn't seen one of these before, I do explain it every time because I think it's a good idea. But it just makes it so that I don't have to keep constantly re-cleaning the edge around the figure, and I can just color willy-nilly and just let things work out. You'll see throughout the process that I'll turn it off and on just to kind of see like what mess I've got underneath, and it gets pretty messy. Another benefit is if you keep it on its own layer, then if you invert it to black, it can really help when it comes to rendering out subtler hue shifts and subtle details, especially in shadowed areas, because white against, or if your character is against white, the white puts out quite a lot of light pollution, basically. It makes it hard to see those more subtle variations. But if you switch it to black, then it really helps everything pop out, and you can make sure that you're getting everything correctly. So that's a huge benefit. I do that quite frequently while painting. So initially I had put the breastplate as one sort of main scale in front, and this was based on like Canon D&D dragon scales, or the Blue Dragon belly scales, but the only difference is that on the Blue Dragon the belly scales are actually sort of like that creamy mustard yellow color, and I wanted to make them that color just for Canon's sake, but in this case I went with blue just to kind of keep it, just to reinforce the Blue Dragon scale, because somebody, if Henry was to ever show this guy to somebody, then someone who would see it would be like, oh, the scales of a blue dragon. But if it was the yellow ones, then Henry would have to explain these are Blue Dragon scales, and it was just a hassle. But anyway, and initially I had him with it as just a big starting off with the big main scale in front, but I figured if he's got a shield, which would be in front of him, and also just for more interest and uniqueness, I decided to put them on his side, like smaller ones on the side, and then another smaller one up across his chest. That would give him some more flexibility, which to me made more sense with like a nautical figure, like if he gets thrown overboard. I thought that would just kind of help out. So I'm just blopping in basic sort of undertone colors. I'm basically just tinting things. You'll notice on the base sketch layer I started off with that green wash over everything. This is something that it took me actually quite a great many years of knowing about it before I actually was able to implement it or bothered, or finally just fell into it. Was starting off a painting on a colored background is so much better than starting on a white background. It helps to tie the color palette together and just harmonizes things. And also if you have like spaces between strokes or patches of thinner strokes, it looks so much more intentional and credible artistically if there's a different color behind it or through it, rather than just fading into white, which just looks cheap. It's irrational. Like, it's not like there's no reason why it should look better, but it just does. It saves a lot of mistakes, but it also, another good thing is it's sort of one of my old art directors had this thing where he says it's like one of the worst things is like a blank page, and the only way that we can like defeat it is like one mark at a time. And for me, starting off with one big wash of color, it's already like you're already 100 strokes in. Like, it just does so much. You can already start feeling it and sensing it. And so when you start adding a color, like a skin tone or something, it already gives you so much more to kind of to go off from. And it's always like it gets said by some in the most cheesy context most of the time, but the phrase "progress not perfection" is incredibly wise and excellent quote, especially with drawing. You'll never just sit there and think about what would be the perfect thing and then make it and it's perfect. The best way to work on things is to just start and just update it and mend it until you've got it right. And that's one of the benefits of having the colored background to start off with, is that now you know how to tweak it and change it and put stuff down, and it's already started the equation for you. Another reason that's good, now that I'm thinking about it, is just the idea of an artist drawing what's in their imagination. I often hear people say, like, when they find out you're an artist, they'll say, like, oh, if only I could draw what I see in my mind, I'd be such a good artist. And the only response to it is, I do too, because I can't draw what's in my imagination. That's not how any of this works for me. As an example, to try to prove it to people or to try to explain it, it's like if you picture your mom or your best friend or even like a celebrity that you've seen a trillion times, you can picture them perfectly in every way. Even like the sound of their voice, you can hear it in your mind's ear, and you can see their face and their smile and them moving in your head. But you can't draw them. I can't draw them. I know exactly what my mom looks like, but I could never just sit there and draw her from memory. It's impossible. I just cannot do it. I could draw something that someone might be able to compare to her, but it wouldn't be anywhere close. I would be really embarrassed. I would never want to show anybody the drawing. So that's another reason why progress is better than perfection. You won't achieve perfection unless you're just building something up to it. No one ever just poops out a perfect thing. Trust me, that can't happen. You can't poop out perfection. This was another good chance for me to sort of try to calm down and relax and just paint rather than trying to be too formulaic about stuff. I often like to be organized and structured and go about things in sort of like a regimented fashion, but I found that in a lot of the cases I've just been really getting more out of just going ahead and painting and just building it up as I go rather than being so restricted to layers and balance and stuff. And in certain contexts those are definitely the right way to go, but in these cases I've been finding that the painterly approach is just a lot more beneficial and to my liking. So while the video is just sort of going through most of these filling in the details, I mean there's not much more to it than plopping in the color and pooping that all in, but I figured I'd go through some of the details about Zolo's history and everything and explain a little bit in more detail who this guy is. So Zolo was born to... I'm just going to be reading this from Henry's email to me. Henry gave me the perfect amount of information, which is great. But it's the more thorough, the better, always. I love it. So Zolo was born to a merchant family and captained one of his family vessels for a number of years. Growing frustrated with the meager profits he was generating from trades, he convinced the crew to supplement their income with some light smuggling and piracy. He thought, does it really count as piracy if you're not attacking dwarf ships? I mean, he's got a point. In the spoils from one ship, Zolo acquired a magical shield that would grant him the ability to float no matter how much he weighed, perfect for the heavily armored dwarven sailor. So that's actually the shield that he has on him right now. And I'll go into explaining that stuff in the particular and how that stuff came to be as we go. Eventually their illicit activity was discovered. He and his crew were exiled from their clan, stripped of name, and forced to embrace the criminal life to its fullest. They sailed together for some time until a storm wrecked their ship, going down with all hands other than Zolo, saved by his shield. As he tells it, after 3 full nights and days of swimming, he finally struck land. With no family to turn to, he began his career as an adventurer for hire, hoping to earn enough gold to gather a crew and set sail again. Grouping with 2 companions of similar ambition for wealth, they entered the employ of a dwarven collector of elf relics and began scouring the world. Cue the main story: dragon scale crowns, conspiracies, player death, and more. Key moments. Early on, he stumbled upon a small iron rod that seemed of little significance, other than it was located in an alcove with other valuable treasures. Zolo picked this up, briefly noting a glint that he shrugged off as a trick of the light, and promptly tied the rod to his beard for safekeeping. This beard weight served the practical purpose of keeping his face clear of any hair should sea wind catch it. The rod was largely forgotten about, literally for a year, until he eventually decided to get it checked over by a mage. In attempting to hand it over for analysis, the rod immediately became immeasurably heavy and fell to the ground at instant terminal velocity. That the ground was 3 stories down seemed of little importance, and a small rod-shaped hole in the floors of the building still remain there today. When not in contact with Zolo, the rod would fall directly down and not be stopped until connecting with Earth. Once there, it would remain unmoved until he collected it. In parentheses, do not use on ships. It became a key tool for unorthodox solutions for many situations he ended up in. It's actually a neat thing, just like a little solid laser that you wear on your person that if you drop it, it just basically shoots itself to the earth. It's kind of fun, trying to think of your own lightsaber, or a cool weapon that's fresh and neat, or that can be used in really clever ways. I see that in this metal rod. There's a lot of solutions you could solve with this. After some time, a ship was liberated from some other pirates who had the misfortune of attacking our adventurers mid-travel. Once they realized they had taken on more than they bargained for, their attempted escape was thwarted by a heroic leap from deck to deck of the half-naked Zolo, who secured the attacking vessel's helm. Caught asleep, he only had time to put on a chainmail vest and grab his weapons. In the course of these adventures, Zolo was able to secure the deed to a long-abandoned dwarf hold located on a cold northern island. From there, he decided his days of exile were at an end, and a new hold was to be created. He adopted the name of Drift Iron, driftwood, but dwarvy. I think Drift Iron is an awesome name, and sent word out to all other exiled dwarves to join him in his establishment. He refused to talk about his original name and hold. Exiled dwarves are not the most pleasant of folk, and for every falsely exiled, there were 3 who earned it several times over with their actions. Zolo continued to build his fighting prowess and name as a fabled adventurer. Using this as a means of keeping his new family in line as best he could, he accepted that it would be a long process to develop his new dream. There was a mixed reaction from the other dwarf holds and flotillas to this development. While some hated the idea of exiles cheating their punishment, others were happy to know their previous family members could find a new home. With the new hold, Zolo needed a new ship, spending some of his adventuring spoils on a top-of-the-line vessel to act as his flagship. Note here, there's so much that happened, but this gives a broad cover of key points to his character development and goals alongside his background. And that was fantastic. There's stuff here about his description of his vessel, the flotilla Drift Iron, and his outfit. The flotilla is sort of like a giant, amazing catamaran or trimaran with a low draft. Another thing that Henry articulated about dwarven how dwarves should have a natural proclivity to seafaring. A very cool ship, and then stuff about his outfits and everything. So it's a good character. It's good. It's really good. So yeah, back to the painting. One thing that I did want to note about the design was on his belt. You might have noticed I wore out the leather, and I specifically had these arcs of wear on the front, the small one, and on the sides, larger ones. That's just wear on the sides. That's where the armor has rubbed up against the belt and worn away the outer material or treatment, and then the one in front is where his the rod in his beard has swayed back and forth over the long years that he's been wearing this, and it's sort of just started wearing out the belt there. So that's what that's there for. That's where the erosion is there for, and I think that that's some of my favorite stuff to do is to put in every single time you're putting in chips or cracks or scratch marks or stains or anything. It's not just a texture brush. It's not just an aesthetic. It's not just texture. It has to go where it has to go, and it can only be where it would be. You're sort of passing your characters through a weird time existence rendering machine where you're just putting them in this world and letting them live, and then taking them out and seeing how everything's cooked in. Well, these are golden nails. I was originally going to be having the armor mounted into metal frames, sort of like diamonds onto metal. But I thought a cooler thing to do, like to sort of play with the material a bit, is I looked up a diagram on a farrier's website, like a horseshoe maker. And this is just a little model of how when they nail horseshoes to a horse's hoof, the nails go up and through, and then they bend them, and then there's like a little notch where the nails lay down flat inside. And so that's where that's from. So I thought some sort of the material would be sort of simple or similar, and it would benefit from, it would make sense that they would make that with that sort of technology. So the shield, as you might remember from the description, if he's got the shield on, he cannot sink. It'll float no matter how much he weighs, and that's an awesome thing to have if you're a seafaring anything. You'll notice I did some boards just vertical on it, and then I realized, wait a sec, that is so boring, and it has nothing to do with the character, so I instead decided to make it out of lots of miniature curved slats. So something that would have been more difficult to build, so it makes it seem a bit more expensive, but it also is based on water. It's like a thematic overall shield. It has that significance to it. So that's why it's designed that way. It's wood carved into the shape of, or it might even be because the flowing of the fibers of the tree. It could have just been steamed and bent into that sort of flowy shape, but either way, it's a thematic choice. It makes it a bit more of a significant object. Before, when I drew it, I had he's got that one solid handle in his hand, and then the one on his forearm. I had the one on his forearm coming up the other way, and then I realized that was dumb. It just seemed natural to have. I've never held a shield, but you think about like putting your arm in it, and it's going to hold your arm. But then I realized that the weight goes down onto the arm, so it needs to be stopped from falling down, and it wouldn't do that if the handle was the other way. So I had to change that. Now he is the leader of whatever this troop that he's got going. And his new dwarf city. So I thought that he should be still have some sort of flashy elements, aside from just his sort of piratey navally stuff. But he just seemed so practical and down to earth that I didn't try to make him look like royalty or anything. But the one way that it did come through is just with like the gold velvety material that his shirt is made of, or his is sort of like a gambeson kind of jacket type thing. Something that would have at least at one point been nice. That's sort of like the thing that I went with Zolo is his stuff is nice but old. I see him as somebody who, he might have grabbed this stuff in his heyday when this is sort of him at his height. As Henry requested. So he's about 100 years old or so. And he died of old age when he was in his mid-200s, so I kind of pictured him being around 40-ish, 45 in human years. But something that's nice but worn out, because he's not constantly on the road for more stealing. Just something a bit more virtuous than that. He just likes to own things and have things. But yeah, so gold velvety sort of shirt. It's based on a chair that I have in my room that my mom had when she was a teenager. It's just this gold velvet chair that's really comfy. and I let my guests sit in it, or it's like a good reading chair. This was another thing that Henry mentioned was this. He's got a dagger in his bootlace in case he goes overboard. Now, thankfully, he can't sink with his shield, but if he ever has to get out of a bind, scuba divers, you'll see they've always got this knife on their calf, and it's for slicing up ropes or seaweed that they get tangled up in and getting out, and that's what this is for. And with the general sort of theme of him having old worn out stuff, I took the handle off so you can sort of just see the tang of the blade. Like everything is kind of eroded and rusty and used, and it's been around a while. And I wanted this knife to look like, it's for when he falls overboard and needs to cut his boots off in order to like lighten the load or get out of the water sooner. But he hasn't needed it, so the knife is in there for a long time. That the wood handle is rotted off, and the blade is all tarnished and nasty. His pants are all like they're striped in sort of like an interlocking way. I figured it'd be a good way to try to have some of that standard dwarfishness in there, at least in some way. But it's like the piratey dwarfness. Like before, when I think of a pirate, I picture them just having like vertical stripes, and I thought having them angled and then interacting down the middle would be a good way for a dwarf to have pirate pants. So once again, with dwarven facial proportion, I really like having smaller craniums, at least vertically, so like eyes higher up near towards the top of the head, because when you have somebody with a larger head to their body size, they're already in the childish zone, and you really don't want to have any of that kiddishness around them. It just looks really bad. It's not fitting, and it just looks like just poor design. But another thing too that's subtle is the way that things are lined up on the face. So if you have a normal human head on a child's body, it can look really weird. But if you have the biggest problem I'm really just getting at here is like the size of the cranium compared to the face. A bigger cranium compared to the face, the bigger the bigger that ratio gets, the more and more like a child they look. So if you have a smaller cranium, it'll make them look more adult, maybe a bit more ferocious and just non-juvenile. And so that's sort of a nice subtle little trick to play on the brain to get the effect you want. As they won't look as cartoony that way. So here's that icicle hitch, it's called, if you want to look that up. Now I want to look it up again, see if there's any like videos of somebody like hanging from it or something. Yeah, I thought that'd be good. So I tried to just go as nondescript as possible, just a tube. Just a tube of iron. Just rendering it up. What else to say about this? There's just lots of fidgeting and working things in. Hair can take a while. I've never ever been a fan of hair brushes, where it's like, look, you can just paint the head of hair in 5 seconds or 10 seconds and it looks like hair. I think it just looks as bad as the Photoshop grass brush, like when people grab the grass brush in Photoshop and paint a field and think it looks like a field of grass. To me, it just stands out like that. I like things all done the hard way. I like hand-painted textures. I like hair. To me, hair is like, I'm not a master at this. I'm like, this is still something that I want to get good at, but I think hair looks so much better if you can do it with fewer strokes than lots of strokes. The master of, well, everything, but of hair especially, is J.C. Leyendecker. He's my favorite artist of all time. It's JCLEYENDECKER. The way that he does hair and everything is just absolutely masterful. It's just the most elegant use of brush strokes. So another example would be Gregory Manchess. The thing I like about both of them in this regard is that they'll use very few strokes and very few colors to represent anything perfectly. You could throw Magnola on there too, but he uses just black and white ink, and he does a really good job of that. But that's sort of more on my that's what I would like to work towards more so than drawing every hair on a head with a brush that is supposed to make it look like hair. Anyway, I kind of put it in the same category as like a blender brush, or like a blending marker in as like a real life proxy, or any time that you use like a smudging tool or a blending tool, it does not look good. It looks really bad. There, I've said it. So these boots, they've got a weird sort of design. Basically, the toes, as far as outside of the toes, they're fairly standard. The part of the toes here is just, I mean, okay, he's got a triple dose of big feet. He's a dwarf, so he gets big feet. He's got boots on, so he's got even bigger feet. And then he's got these protrusions out on the front, so he's got triple dose of big feet mode. But those are just paddles. They're just flippers for when he. So if he gets into the water with his shield and he needs to get around. I mean, in the description, he swam for 3 days. I don't think he wants to need to do that ever again. So he has these toes of leather, these flaps of leather sewed onto his boots permanently to help it so that he can swim harder and faster. And that's what those are for. I don't think they would get too much in the way, but I think even just having that little subtle bit of flipper would help move things along quite a bit in the water. Yeah, lots of just texture work, refining things. The design for this shield that Henry mentioned was that he described it as a small wooden shield. He included his own diagram of it, but he described it as being. Oh, actually, you know what? I think I'm doing the axe here first. I'll talk about the shield when I work on the shield. So this axe, it's called Whirlpool. It was commissioned by Zolo to be made. It's a war axe, or it's a good fighting axe that he's made and described, and he included a little diagram that he drew of it. And this is admittedly loosely based on it. If you can just imagine this, but just like a simpler version. But I wanted it to build on what he had given me without breaking it too much. At least I hope it didn't break it. I hope this doesn't bother Henry too much. But when he described it and showed me the drawing, it reminded me of African throwing daggers. From the last few hundred years. These are just, if you look them up, like this isn't based on any one in particular, but it's just amazing to see what you can get away with as far as blade design. Look up African throwing knives or African throwing daggers, and these are just the most messed up looking machete, kukri, hatchet, Bowie knife nightmares. They just look like they just have like the weirdest shapes that you would never think, and my guess is that they're just designed to kind of like stick in no matter at what point in the rotation they're in. They just got all these protuberances and strange curves and bends, and I thought it just kind of clicked with me, and it worked well for this. It makes it look more useful and functional. But also a bit more, I think, expensive and kind of intended or special built, I'd say. This is another case where I made it rusty as well. All of his stuff is rusty or tarnished, and I kind of thought that would be fitting with somebody who lives amidst seawater all the time. He's getting wet, the salt is in the air. I thought that would just, it would be good. Even though he's fancy and he'd probably know better than to let it get rusty, I thought it would just be nice to have everything kind of be aged up a bit in that direction. Just a simple wooden handle. I wouldn't want anything too heavy or anything. I mean, he does have the chain attached to his wrist so that he doesn't lose it, and he can like hang from it. But I thought a wood handle might help make it a little bit lighter in the water if it floats slightly. This curvy sort of blade work. Is another kind of like nautical thing, just trying to make it like water, sort of like a wave motif. The whole thing, I mean, it's called Whirlpool. So I wanted all these lines to kind of, like Henry's doodle looks more like a knife or a weapon that would be called Whirlpool. It's much more symmetrical. It still has an S to it, but in this case, I thought by having these embossed lines, kind of, or like these lines extruded from it, it might help make it look a bit more tied together and thematic. So now here I've got rust that's come off there, just like going down the boards, like it's sort of been put up wet, not dried off before hung up, and just lots of rust everywhere. And it also kind of, I think it goes well with his red hair. Nice to draw another red-haired character. I think red-haired people are it's just the best look for fantasy stuff. Just fun, crazy eyebrows too. And arm hair, just more stuff there. It did take a while to finesse the hands to a point where I like them, even though I did put in all that extra time building them up from the simplest shapes to bones and muscles and everything. There's still something that gets lost in that translation, and that's something that I'm working on getting better at. I want to be able to just nail it and get it sorted out from the get-go. But I'll just learn by doing, and it takes practice. I wouldn't be getting any better at it if I wasn't doing this. So it's still something I figure for any artist, as long as you're aware of your mistakes, don't be afraid to make them. If there's something that you're challenged by or that you find difficult, draw lots of it. Just go whole hog. You'll learn to never fear anything. Everything is just a shape. Everything is an object. Everything that you're ever going to draw is just something that you could just see. And everything that you can see can be held and moved around and picked up. And it's just a matter of breaking it down. Just start with a cube. Start chipping away at it. It's just an object. And it's just nice to not be scared of stuff. So these pants, I just wanted to texture them up a bit. Everything that you design, especially in fantasy, it applies to sci-fi and everything too, but especially in fantasy, everything has helped quite a lot if everything looks like it was fabricated. So that's like stitching around seams or edging and serging on fabric, or like rivets and peen dentations on metal. Just that sort of stuff helps make everything feel so much more lived in and believable, and adds to immersion and quality and everything. So that's what I'm just doing here. So making it look like, my idea is just like a bunch of vertical slats of fabric sewn together, and then the red just sewn on top of it as just superficial decoration. The point of it is to add attention and decoration. I wanted something with a lot more visual energy down low to kind of work with Henry's description of them being grounded, rather than actually putting weights or super like a bunch of like belts or sashes or anything hanging down. I thought even just visual weight on the legs would help with that. So he's got a bit of fabric under the chains just so he doesn't get chafed. I'd imagine if you're getting in and out of water and you're near the sea, then if you have anything rubbing against your skin, like metal, I don't know, it'd probably be better to have something between you and the metal there. Because once your skin gets wet and stuff rubs off, or starts rubbing off on it, off your foot, or off your arm, or whatever's getting touched, that's where you get the horrible blisters and stuff. So that's no good. So I wanted these to look a little bit more like scale. It's more biological, having grooves and things in them. Now, the scales in between the larger scales are actually as well taken from the Blue Dragon from the D&D books, but those are actually colored the right color. The blue one, the large ones, should be more of like a creamy mustard, sort of olivey color. But I betrayed you, Henry. Please forgive me. Yeah, you can always do more on a beard, I learned. I think the last couple of beards I've done have been dark, so I hadn't needed to put in as much detail. But light hair definitely needs more detail. I learned from a hairstylist once. She was telling me about how there's only three. No, there's only two pigments in for hair in the human race. There's like blonde is just no pigment, brown and black hair is black pigment, and red hair is red pigment, and brown hair is orange and black pigment. And I think that's neat. Anyway, so at first, okay, yeah, the shield. Henry's description of it is a small wooden shield that's designed to look sort of like a lifesaver, like on a boat, like a life preserver, like the ring that you throw in to the cartoon character after they've fallen off the boat. And so he had a little diagram, and it looked quite a lot like the iconic kind of thing. And I thought, okay, that's a great idea. Having sort of a gimmick or a hook for any design is just you should take it. So I was really happy to do that. But I thought, what if I did that, but translated it into something a bit more ornate, dwarvy, and sort of significant looking, and more specific. And then by doing that, I wound up with a design that I was quite happy with. So rather than, at first I started off with just a couple metal hoops to put the rope through, because the life preserver or the lifesaver has the rope that goes around it. Then I thought, let's make it a bit more. So I made some dolphins, just some metal, like something a bit more ornate and expensive. And then the rope goes through those. And also, it's not perfectly round; it's octagonal. It's like I needed it to look a bit more dwarven-y. Even though I really want to do what I can in the future to, I mean, not necessarily in the R&D fantasy stuff, but in my own personal work, is sort of break the dwarf free from the polygons. I think there's more. My opinion is that dwarves, I think, would find polygonal stuff to be blasé and a bit recherché. Like it'd be like if you can carve something like a cube or a polygon, it'd be like, well, okay, that's good. Did you also change your own diaper? Like it would just be so entry level. I think to them, like carving an immaculate tree or a sphere would be like entrance test into a guild of some kind. But that's just a mini rant anyway. It's not a hill I'm going to die on or anything, but anyway, that's my thinking. So anyway, those are just a couple little details that I was able to put into the shield to make it a bit more specific. I thought he should have that. And then just a simple chain. The chain, I just said, let's just make it a chain. And then hair. Hair is starting to get fun. I used to dread doing hair, but I really started liking it, especially after just being such a fan of J.C. Leyendecker and just paying attention, or like John Singer Sargent, and just seeing how they just approached it with simple shapes and how you can, it's like 3 to 5 strokes, and you just get it, you see it, you know exactly what the hair would feel like, or like what it would sound like to push a comb through it, and you don't need a lot of detail to get it. It's just the detail can just be kind of fun, especially for like a wiry, messy, sort of bushy, like saltwater filled beard, like what Henry described to me. So I thought it would be a nice time for some texture. The pants were also inspired by Smee from Hook. I'll just admit that right now. Just the big baggy pants. Oh yeah, another thing was Henry mentioned that if he has any tattoos or anything, they need to be black or green ink, so I gave him just a little bit. He had no mention of any scars or missing limbs or tattoos or any sort of identifiable marks. But I think that since he mentioned it and had something in mind, some sort of culture behind it, where he would even say, make sure it's green or black. I figure there's enough in that little line that it could sort of warrant having it there. So yeah, this is Zolo drift iron for Henry. He was a blast to draw. So relieved to have another dwarf. This is fantastic. There's going to be, I hope to have at least 4 more dwarves by the time we get all 64 of these done. So this is for my free weekly character art lottery. Follow me on Twitter at R&D Fantasy. Every Sunday I let everybody know what hashtag to tweet by the end of the following Monday in order to enter for free. You just send me, and then the winner gets their D&D character drawn, humanoid, non-humanoid, as long as it's fantasy, original, and you love your character, and that's it. So anyway, this was a blast. Thanks for joining in. Thanks for watching, and I hope it helps. Thanks, guys.